The name is Bond. James Bond.
Dr. No and the birth of Bond, James Bond. Hello and welcome back to Zains007Fancast, the podcast where we look at the James Bond films, novels and everything else 007 related. I'm your host Zain Ibrahim with my partner, scriptwriter and editor Welshie Ickerslyke. Join us as we sift through the glamour and danger and gently point out that half the gadgets wouldn't work and most of the villains could have been arrested for health and safety violations. Today, we're not just reviewing a film, we're going back to the birth of a cinematic giant. 1962's Dr. No wasn't just another thriller, it was the start of the longest running film franchise in history. It introduced the world to Sean Connery as 007, created the Bond formula, and, depending who you ask, also introduced the most impractical nuclear facility ever built. But to really understand Dr. No, we need to go wider. Fleming's novel, Fleming's life, post-war Britain, the Cold War, the way a cash-strapped production team in Jamaica somehow created a cultural juggernaut. And yes, we'll also talk about guano, bird poo, because somehow that is central to the story. So pour yourself a vodka martini, or if it's too early, a cup of tea, and let's go back to the beginning. Before the gadgets, before the Aston Martin, before billion-dollar budgets and globe-spanning franchises, there was Dr. No. In 1962, audiences walked into cinemas with no idea what to expect, and what they saw changed cinema forever. A spy in a tuxedo, a mysterious villain with a deadly plan, and a woman emerging from the sea in a white bikini that would become instantly iconic. But here's the twist. The James Bond that Sean Connery brought to life in the movie was not the same James Bond Ian Fleming created in his novel just 4 years earlier. The book and the film share a title, but their tones, their characters, and even their endings are wildly different. So, let's open up Ian Fleming's Dr. No, the novel. Right away you notice something different compared to the film. The tone, it's darker, grittier, less glamorous, more brutal. The story begins not with James Bond, but with death. Fleming opens on 2 British agents, Strangways and his secretary, working late at a colonial government office in Kingston, Jamaica. Suddenly, gunmen burst in, the 3 blind mice. That's what Fleming calls them, assassins disguised as blind beggars. They execute Strangways, murder his secretary, and disappear into the night. Cold, efficient, merciless. Already Fleming is making a point. Jamaica might look like paradise, but under the surface it's a place of danger. And these opening murders, they set the stage for everything to come. Enter James Bond. When we meet him in Dr. No, Bond isn't quite the suave screen hero you remember. He's battered. He's recovering from his near-death poisoning in From Russia with Love. Fleming even writes about Bond's medical checkups, his health tests, and his struggle to get back into shape. This isn't a superhero. This is a man who's been through hell and isn't sure if he's ready to dive back in. His boss, M, decides to test him. He sends Bond on what's supposed to be a simple mission, fly to Jamaica and investigate the disappearance of Strangways. The assumption is that maybe it's just an accident, maybe nothing serious. Of course, we know it's much more than that. Bond arrives in Jamaica, and the setting is pure Fleming. The humid air, the smell of the sea, the vibrant but politically charged atmosphere of a colony nearing independence. Fleming adored Jamaica. He wrote all the Bond novels there, and you can feel his affection in the way he describes it. But there's also unease. You can sense the cultural shifts, the tension between colonial authority and local life. Once in Kingston, Bond starts piecing things together, learns about Strangway's last known movements, and pretty soon all roads point to a mysterious island off the coast, Crab Key, owned by a man named Dr. Julius No. But before Bond sets foot on Crab Key, he reconnects with an ally, Quarrel. Now, if you've only seen the movie, you know Quarrel as Bond's Jamaican fishing guide, played with warmth and grit by John Kitzmiller. In the novel, Quarrel is given even more depth. He's loyal, brave, and absolutely crucial to Bond's survival. Fleming treats him with respect, even if the language is sometimes dated. Quarrel trains Bond physically, helping him recover his fitness. He He also provides knowledge of the local waters and survival skills. Without Quarrel, Bond wouldn't even make it to Crab Key. Tragically, Quarrel doesn't survive the story, and the way he dies in the book is brutal, burned alive by Dr. No's trained attack weapon, a flame-throwing dragon machine. It's one of the novel's most horrific moments, and it underscores the stakes. Bond is walking into hell. Then there's Honeychild Ryder. In the film, she's Ursula Andress, stepping out of the ocean like Aphrodite, instantly iconic. But in the book, Honey is very different. Fleming writes her as scarred, literally. She was attacked by a man in her youth, leaving her with a disfigured nose. She's an orphan, self-taught, surviving by collecting rare shells she sells for cash. Honeychild Ryder isn't glamorous. She's tragic, tough, and resourceful. She dreams of escaping poverty, maybe becoming a naturalist. And yet, there's vulnerability too. Fleming gives her one of the most heartbreaking backstories of any Bond heroine. When Bond and Honey meet on Crab Key, it's less about flirtation and more about survival. Together, they're hunted, captured, and dragged into the lair of Dr. No. And here's where the novel goes full gothic horror. Dr. Julius No himself is one of Fleming's strangest creations. He's a scientist of Chinese and German descent, monstrously tall and thin, with steel pincers instead of hands. He wears a kimono, lives in an underground lair carved out of Crab Key, and surrounds himself with luxury stolen from the outside world. Fleming paints him as both grotesque and terrifyingly intelligent. His obsession? Testing the limits of human endurance. To him, people are lab rats. When Bond confronts him, Dr. No doesn't just plan to kill him, he wants to study him. And this is where the novel's climax differs completely from the film. In the book, Dr. No forces Bond into a survival gauntlet, a sadistic obstacle course designed to kill him in stages. Bond has to crawl through electrified tunnels, escape swarms of poisonous insects, endure physical exhaustion, and even battle a giant squid. Yes, you heard that right, a giant squid. It's bizarre, it's pulpy, it's grotesque, and it's pure Fleming.
Bond barely survives, and when he finally reaches Dr. No, he kills him not in a spectacular nuclear explosion, but in a grimly symbolic way.
He buries him alive under a mound of bird guano. Because Crab Key, you see, is a guano mining operation. Yes, the villain's empire is literally built on bird droppings. Fleming had a dark sense of humor. Honey, meanwhile, narrowly escapes her own ordeal. In the book, she's tied to an air shaft, left to drown by the rising tide. Bond rescues her in time. And then, as all Bond stories do, it ends with survival. Bond returns, the villain destroyed, the girl saved, though the scars, emotional and physical, linger. Reading the novel today, what strikes you is how much darker it feels compared to the film. There's a rawness to it. The violence is harsher, the villain is more grotesque, the heroine is more damaged, and Bond himself is more human, beaten, tested, and scarred. But beyond the pulp thrills, Fleming was writing about something bigger.
Think about it. Dr. No came out in 1958.
Britain was no longer the empire it once was. Jamaica was already moving toward independence, which it would gain in 1962, the same year the film premiered. Bond in the novel is like Britain itself, still powerful, still capable, but vulnerable, uncertain, even clinging to old methods in a new world. And Dr. No, he's the face of modern threats, ruthless, technological, transnational, not a nation state, but a private figure with wealth and power beyond governments. In a way, Dr. No foreshadows the supervillains of later Bond films, the ones with secret bases and world-threatening schemes.
That's what makes the novel so fascinating. It's not just an adventure story, it's transitional text. Fleming is moving Bond from the gritty espionage of the early books into the more fantastical world we associate with film. So when you read Dr. No, you're not just reading a Bond novel, you're watching the bridge being built from Cold War spy fiction to cinematic spectacle. And speaking of spectacle, when producers decided to make Bond's first big screen adventure, Dr. No was the story they chose.
But to bring Bond to life in film, a lot had to change. And that's where things get really interesting. So today, we're diving deep into both versions of Dr. No, the novel and the film, to uncover how one story spawned two very different legends. Along the way, we'll explore the Cold War paranoia that shaped Fleming's writing, the high-risk gamble of bringing Bond to the big screen, and the surprising ways Dr. No still echoes through pop culture 60 years later. This isn't just a comparison, it's a story about transformation, about how a pulp novel became the spark that launched the world's most successful spy franchise.
This is Dr. No. Here's where it gets fun. At the point you might be asking, what really changed between the novel and the film? Let's break it down. There are many differences between the book and the film versions. I've picked out some of the main ones.
The villain, book Dr. No, grotesque bird poo baron, torturer with a giant squid, obsessed with human experimentation, and physically monstrous. Film Dr. No, smooth, elegant Joseph Wiseman in a Nehru jacket, much less guano, much more gravitas, intelligent, calculating and menacing but humanized. The steel pincers, towering height and gauntlet traps are gone. Instead, the focus is on intellect and psychological threat.
James Bond. Book Bond is cold, ruthless and battle-worn. He's recovering from near-death poisoning, cynical about the world, and far less charming than Connery's interpretation. Film Bond is confident, charming and effortlessly suave. The brutality remains, but the charisma is dialed up for the screen. Honey Rider, book Honey, tragic backstory, abused, scarred, vengeful. Film Honey, Ursula Andress in a bikini, dubbed voice, less depth, but unforgettable imagery. On the screen, Ursula Andress is instantly iconic. Her backstory is largely removed. The focus is on the visual impact rather than character depth.
But that visual impact is unforgettable and arguably what the film needed for its tone. The trials. Book Bond suffers an ordeal straight out of It's a Knockout. Spiders, fire, squid. Film Bond just sabotages a reactor by fiddling with levers.
The tone, atmosphere. Fleming's Bond mixes Cold War anxiety, gothic horror and pulp adventure.
The film emphasizes glamour, exoticism and stylish thrills. One is cerebral and unsettling, the other is visually dazzling and fun.
The finale, spoiler alert, in the book, Bond kills Dr. No with a mountain of guano. Yes, the villain literally dies underdone. With Bond surviving a gauntlet of traps. Film, Bond drowns him in a cooling pool. Much cleaner, though less funny with Bond sabotaging Dr. No's nuclear reactor. It's faster, more cinematic and easier for audiences to follow while maintaining tension.
It's a perfect example of Eon smoothing Fleming's pulp excess into sleek cinema. What we see here is a pattern. The adaptation process didn't just condense the story, it reshaped it.
Fleming's vision became a template, a springboard for cinematic Bond rather than a literal translation, and that's why Dr. No works both as a novel and as a film, but in a different way. To understand Dr. No, you have to understand Ian Fleming. Picture this, it's the early 1950s, the Second World War is over, the Cold War is heating up, and in Jamaica a former British intelligence officer sits at a desk in a house he built by the sea. The house is called GoldenEye. The man is Ian Fleming. He's bored. Fleming had lived a life of privilege and espionage. During the war, he helped plan intelligence operations for the Royal Navy. After the war, he worked as a journalist, but by the time he was in his 40s, he wanted something more. So every morning in Jamaica, he sat at his typewriter and began to hammer out the adventures of a fictional spy. That spy is James Bond. Now, Bond wasn't conjured out of thin air. Fleming admitted that Bond was partly a fantasy version of himself. Harder, cooler, more ruthless. He also borrowed traits from real intelligence officers he'd known during the war. And he gave his creation a deliberately boring name, James Bond, because as Fleming said, he wanted a name as flat and dull as possible. Ironically, the dull name is now one of the most famous names in the world.
Fun fact, on his bookshelf at GoldenEye, his home in Jamaica, he had a bird-watching book titled Birds of the West Indies by an American ornithologist named James Bond. 1900 to 1989. Bond was a Philadelphia-based ornithologist and expert on Caribbean bird life. Fleming was an avid birdwatcher himself, and he spotted the author's name on the cover of the book. He thought James Bond was short, simple, and masculine, perfect for the character he was creating.
By 1958, Fleming had already written 5 Bond novels. They were gritty, violent, and packed with Cold War tension. But Dr. No, he tried something darker, something stranger. Why Jamaica? Well, Fleming loved the island.
He lived there half the year, swimming in the warm Caribbean and writing his books in the mornings. Jamaica gave Bond novels a sun-drenched, exotic edge that set them apart from the grey corridors of traditional spy fiction. And Fleming wasn't shy about borrowing from reality.
The villainous Dr. Julius No, for instance, may have been inspired by real-life figures. Some scholars link him to the sinister Fu Manchu archetype, others to Cold War fears of Chinese communism. His steel pincers and deformed body reflected pulp horror influences as much as espionage.
But Fleming's genius was in combining it all: Cold War paranoia, Caribbean politics, sadistic villains, and a protagonist who embodied both brutal efficiency and upper-class style. When Dr. No hit shelves in 1958, it wasn't just another spy story. It was a strange cocktail of thriller, survival tale, and gothic horror, and it marked a turning point in Bond's literary career. In fact, Fleming almost killed Bond off right before Dr. No.
In the novel From Russia with Love, published the year before, Bond is poisoned on the final page, left hovering between life and death. Dr. No, with Bond recovering from the near-death experience, was the opening. The mission to Jamaica is meant to be simpler, almost a test to see if he is still fit for duty. Spoiler, it turns out to be anything but simple.
Bond in the novel is darker, more damaged. He's not the smooth cinematic hero yet.
He's closer to Fleming's own psyche, cynical, chain-smoking, and more than a little brutal. And Fleming's world was equally unforgiving. The Cold War was in full swing. The Soviet Union had launched Sputnik just a year before Dr. No was published, igniting the space race. Britain was struggling to maintain its influence as its empire crumbled, and Jamaica, the setting for the novel, was on the brink of independence.
All of that seeps into the pages of Dr. No. The novel isn't just about spies and villains, it's about power shifting across the globe, about Britain's uncertain place in a new world order, and about one man caught in the middle of it all. So when you read Dr. No today, it's not just pulp fiction, it's a time capsule. It's Fleming channeling Cold War anxieties into a story that feels both fantastical and frighteningly real. And in a way, that's the magic of Bond. He was always a reflection of his time.
Fleming's Bond was a blunt instrument for a fading empire. The film Bond, well, that would be something else entirely. But before we get to the movie, let's stay in the pages for a while.
Because the Dr. No novel
deserves its moment in the spotlight. By the late 1950s, Ian Fleming was doing well. His Bond novels had found a loyal audience, especially in Britain, but he wasn't yet the global phenomenon we think of today. That all changed when Bond caught Hollywood's eye. The story of how James Bond made it to the big screen is full of near misses, bold gambles, and honestly, a little bit of luck.
Let's rewind to 1954. CBS actually adapted Casino Royale, the very first Bond novel, as a 1-hour TV special for their anthology series Climax. It starred Barry Nelson as an Americanized Jimmy Bond. Yes, you heard that right. James Bond was briefly an American, fighting against a villain named Le Chiffre in a black and white TV play. The show was mostly forgotten, and it definitely didn't launch a franchise. But the idea was out there. Maybe Bond could work on screen.
Fast forward a few years, a Canadian producer called Harry Saltzman secured the rights to Fleming Bond novels. At the same time, another producer, Albert Cubby Broccoli, was looking for his project. Together, Saltzman and Broccoli formed a partnership that would change cinema's history. Their new company, Eon Productions, set out to make the first paper James Bond movie, but there was a problem.
Which book should they adapt? Fleming had already written several Bond adventures by then: Casino Royale, Live and Let Die, Moonraker, Diamonds Are Forever, From Russia with Love, Dr. No, and Goldfinger. Each had its own strengths, so why Dr. No? The answer comes down to budget. Dr. No was relatively self-contained. It didn't require globe hopping across multiple continents. It didn't involve massive space-age set pieces. And the villain's plan, sabotaging American missile tests, was simple enough to stage with limited resources.
Because make no mistake, the first Bond film was at risk.
United Artists only gave Saltzman and Broccoli a budget of around $1 million.
That was small even by 1962 standards. No one expected Bond to become the juggernaut it is today, so
Eon needed a lead actor who could make audiences believe in James Bond, and that search became legendary. Cary Grant was approached first. Imagine that, Cary Grant as Bond. The problem? Grant would only commit to one film. Saltzman and Broccoli wanted a franchise, not a one-off.
Other names floated, including David Niven, Patrick McGowan, even Richard Burton, but none felt quite right. Then came a Scottish actor named Sean Connery. At that time, Connery wasn't a star. He'd done some smaller roles, but he wasn't anyone's first choice. He was rough around the edges, not polished, not aristocratic. But Broccoli's wife Dana saw something in him. She said he moved like a panther. He had a raw physical presence, charisma you couldn't fake. Connery screen tested, and once he walked into the room, Fleming's cold, brutal spy suddenly had a face. United Artists pushed Sean Connery. He was tall, rugged, Scottish, and let's be honest, looked like he could win a fight. Fleming wasn't sure. Connery was too rough, too working class. As an ex-milkman and bodybuilder, too unrefined. After seeing Dr. No, Fleming changed his mind. He even began to alter Bond's backstory in later novels to align more with Connery's persona, giving Bond a Scottish father. Fun fact, to refine Connery, they sent him to a movement coach who taught him how to walk like a panther, sit like an aristocrat, and order wine without sounding like he worked in a pub. And then came the scene in the casino, Connery, cigarette dangling, eyebrow raised, uttering the immortal words, Bond, James Bond.
Sir.
French. Soviet French. I admire your luck, Mr.
Bond. James Bond.
Mr. Bond, I suppose you wouldn't care to, raise the limit?
I have no objection.
Nah.
3 words that turned him into a star. With Connery cast, the next challenge was the Bond girl. For Honey Rider, the producers needed someone unforgettable. They found Ursula Andress, a Swiss actress with striking looks and a strong presence. She wasn't a Polish actress, her lines were dubbed in post-production. But she had the iconic image that would define the Bond girl archetype. That moment when she emerges from the sea in her white bikini, knife at her hip, conch shells in her hand. That wasn't just a scene, it was pop culture being born. Then came the villain, Dr. No himself. Joseph Wiseman, a Canadian actor, was cast in the role. With his sharp features, calm voice and commanding presence, Wiseman brought the character to life without resorting to the grotesque exaggerations of the book. Gone were the steel pincers, the towering deformities, the giant squid showdown. In the film, Dr. No was streamlined into something cooler, more menacing, a nuclear-powered mastermind with a quiet voice and deadly intent. And behind the camera, Terence Young was chosen to direct. Young deserves enormous credit for shaping the cinematic Bond. He coached Connery on how to move, how to dress, how to embody sophistication. It was Young who gave Connery the edge of refinement,
teaching him to wear a suit as comfortably as pajamas. Without Young, Connery might never have become Bond.
Production wasn't smooth sailing. Remember the budget. Corners had to be cut. The famous opening gun barrel sequence was shot using a stuntman. Sets were relatively modest. The visual effects were, by later standards, crude, but necessity breeds creativity, and sometimes magic comes from limitations. Take the opening scene. It was iconic. Maurice Bender designed the title sequence with that swirling gun barrel, those bold graphics, and that unforgettable theme music. Monty Norman composed the Bond theme, arranged by Joan Barry. The guitar riff, the brass, the swagger, it was unlike anything audiences have heard before. From the first notes, Bond had a sound that screamed style and danger. When Dr. No premiered in London in 1962, expectations were modest. This was just another spy film, right? Wrong. The audience was electrified.
Here was a hero who was cool, confident, and lethal. Here was a film that mixed danger with sex appeal, exotic locales with modern fears. Bond wasn't just a spy, he wished for fulfillment.
But before we jump ahead to the film's legacy, let's pause, because the most fascinating part of Dr. No is the gap between the book and the film. Same story, same characters, but two different worlds.
Now, where I did briefly compare the novel and film earlier in the podcast, I want to really break down those differences for you. If you are a literary lover like myself, these small differences can really make or break the film version.
Sean Connery steps onto the screen, smooth and confident, lighting his first cigarette, coolly ordering his martini, shaken not stirred. Already we see the cinematic Bond, charming, lethal, stylish. He's less haunted than Fleming's Bond, but more immediately engaging for a film audience.
The women in the audience wish they could be with him, all the men in the audience wish they were him. In fact, if you remember, Bond is the cooler version that Ian Fleming himself wished he could be. Audiences didn't want to see a serious 1950s style spy, weak and sickly, like in the novel. They wanted a fantasy, somebody they could dream about at night. The wit, charm and cheek that Connery was given made him an everyman inspiration.
Ursula Andress's Honey Rider emerges from the waves. Iconic, unforgettable, and instantly defining what a Bond girl could be. The filmmakers didn't worry about her backstory, they sold the image, and in doing so, they created a visual that would echo through decades of Bond films.
Gone was the sadness of the character, gone were the scars, abuse and the depth. Honeychild was now just honey, with a fabulous body to drool over. Perhaps some of the realism was gone, but in its place was 1960s Hollywood glamour, a fashion and style icon. Ursula didn't even have to speak, she just needed to look the part.
The villain, Dr. Julius No, is much more restrained on screen than on the page. Joseph Wiseman delivers a calm, menacing presence. He doesn't need to be grotesque. The camera and script do the work. His lair is sleek, modern and dangerous. No giant squids, no steel pincers. Well, not on camera. It's intelligence, technology, and a quiet menace, which ultimately proves just as frightening.
Yes, even the villain of the film was given a Hollywood makeover. Remember, this was the dawning of a new era with new technology available, and an infinite world of possibilities for both hero and villain.
Ken Adams' production design is another key factor. His use of angular sets, stark shadows, and geometric spaces give Dr. No's lair an alien feel without extravagant effects. Combine that with Terence Young's direction, John Barry's arrangement, and you could get a world that's both believable and fantastical. The film compresses the novel's sprawling survival plot into a tighter, more cinematic narrative. The gauntlet of traps becomes simplified. Bond must destroy Dr. No nuclear reactor before it disrupts American space launches. The climax is more explosive, more immediate, and importantly, more visually cinematic. The film doesn't just adapt Fleming, it transforms him. The brutal survival story of the novel becomes an adventure thriller designed for mass audiences. Exotic locations, glamorous imagery, high stakes, and charismatic leads. That formula, introduced here, would become the template for nearly every Bond film to follow.
So what was the impact of Dr. No? The film was a surprise hit. Audiences were drawn to Connery's charisma, Andress's iconic presence, and the sleek, exciting world of spies and intrigue. Critics were divided. Some called it sensationalist, but the public couldn't get enough. Dr. No set the Bond formula: exotic locations, iconic villains, glamorous women, and gadgets. The template for decades of sequels was born, and in a few short years, James Bond would become one of the most successful and enduring franchises in cinematic history.
Even Fleming recognized it. The novels remained popular, but the films elevated Bond into a global phenomenon that no single book could match, and launched a franchise that still thrives 6 decades later.
It cemented tropes, exotic locales, charismatic villains, glamorous women, absurd lairs. It reassured Britain of its relevance, gave America a new hero, and inspired a wave of imitators, from the man from UNCLE to Austin Powers. And it all started with a Scotsman in a tux and a director who decided to let him say his name twice. More than anything, Dr. No proved the formula worked. It wasn't the best Bond film, but it set the stage. It gave us the tone, the music, the glamour, and crucially, it gave us Sean Connery, the man who made Bond immortal. For a film that only cost $1 million to make and made $60 million at the box office, I think you can imagine that everyone was very pleased that they had taken the leap. Just before we finish, I'd like to give you some interesting facts from the film that you might not know. The tarantula scene, Connery was terrified. They used glass between him and the spider. The close-ups were done with a stunt double. Imagine explaining that on your CV. Ursula Andress said she only took the role for the money, yet the bikini sold for £41,000 years later. That's more than most of us will ever spend on clothes, combined.
Which Dr. No do you prefer?
The brutal, dark survival story of Fleming's novel, or the stylish cinematic debut that launched Sean Connery into immortality? Both matter. Both shaped the legend of James Bond. And together, they remind us that adaptation isn't about copying, it's about transformation. Fleming gave us the raw materials: a spy, a villain, a woman, a tropical island. Eon Productions turned those materials into myth, and 60 years later, that myth still captivates audiences around the world. From the shadows of Crab Key to the silver screen, Dr. No wasn't just a story, it was the beginning of a legacy. And that's just the beginning of the Bond saga.
So there we have it, Dr. No, the birth of Bond on screen, the film that gave us Connery, gave us the Bond girl template, and gave us the idea that world domination could be attempted with a dragon-shaped tractor. Next time you'll head to From Russia with Love, Cold War intrigue, gypsy camp fights, and the sweetest train battle ever filmed. Until then, stay suave, avoid radioactive islands, and remember, Bond will return, and so will I. And a big thank you to all our new subscribers. Watch out for new exclusive content coming soon. Remember, here at Zains007Fancast, we do it better.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.
In the shadow of the island, where the secrets never show, lurks a whisper cold and deadly. They call him Dr. No, silent hands that move the pieces. games that only he controls. Danger hides behind his silence, a fire without a soul. The name's a warning, the world should know. A shadow rising, the dark will grow, and only bold can face dark to know. Golden dreams and stolen power echo softly in the night. Every promise hides a poison. Every kiss conceals a fight. The name's a weapon, the world should know. A storm is coming, the dark will grow, and only bond can face dark to know. Steel against desire, eyes beneath the flame. One man dares defy him, one that knows his name. The name's a warning, the world will know. The shadows tremble, the danger grows, and only bond can face dark to know.
This episode is brought to you by Crab Key Holidays. Looking for an island getaway with sunshine, sand, and mild radiation poisoning? Come to Crab Key. Ride our dragon tank, try our all-you-can-eat guano buffet, and maybe meet our charming host, Dr. No. Terms and conditions apply. Mostly the no survivors bit.